Have you ever said or done something and instantly thought, wait, where did that even come from? Or maybe you've caught yourself acting like someone you're not. Like you were playing a role in a performance, smiling through discomfort, saying all the right things, showing up in a way that earns validation but feels hollow. You look successful on the outside, but inside, something feels like it's missing. Take the high-achieving professional, for example. The one who's always polished, reliable, and in control. They've built their persona perfectly, never showing anger, never admitting confusion, always being the strong one. But over time, they start to feel numb. Their relationships lack depth and connection. But why? Because their entire life is being lived through the ego script, a version of themselves carefully curated to be accepted. Meanwhile, the suppressed parts, the grief, the vulnerability, the sexuality, the raw emotion, the childlike wonder have been exiled into the shadow. And when the shadow isn't integrated, life begins to feel flat. You might achieve things, but not feel them. You might be in relationships, but not really connect. You're alive, but you're not really living. And that's the cost of being disconnected from your full self. And that's why shadow work isn't just healing, it's awakening. In this episode, we'll explore the powerful concept of the shadow as described by Carl Jung. You'll learn how the shadow is formed, how it influences your behavior and emotions, and why integrating it is the secret to spiritual fulfillment, inner peace, and successful manifestation. Shadow work is how we become whole and manifest a life beyond our wildest dreams. Despite what social media will lead you to believe, manifestation isn't all moonlight, butterflies, crystals, and good vibes. It can lead you into the darkest corners of your psyche. The real hell isn't somewhere we go after death, but a hidden realm within us, buried deep in the subconscious, where our exiled parts reside and our demons lie. As daunting as it may seem, this is not a place to avoid. If you want to walk the path of the alchemist, you must be willing to go there. As Carl Jung wrote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome back to Aulona Alchemy. Before we dive in, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. Shockingly, over 70% of my regular listeners aren't subscribed. So if that's you, join the Aulona Alchemy community officially. I'm manifesting a space where we grow together, support one another, and elevate our consciousness. In return, I promise to keep pouring more and more value into every episode as we grow and evolve together. So let's dive in. Conscious versus unconscious layers of the psyche. So let's break down the two fundamental layers of the psyche. There's the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind is the surface level of your awareness. It includes your thoughts, your decisions, and your personality as you perceive it. It's where the ego and the persona operate. The unconscious mind is the deeper layer. It stores everything you've repressed, rejected, and forgotten. Your wounds, your instincts, your trauma, and your potential. This is where the shadow lives. And unless you bring those parts to light, they will influence your life from the dark. As Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And it's true. How many women do you know who keep attracting the same toxic men in different packaging? Or guys who swear they've just got the worst luck, but somehow end up in the same messy situations over and over again. Different characters, same storyline. These aren't coincidences. They're just people unknowingly manifesting from their unhealed shadows. Let's dive into the key structures of the psyche as described by Carl Jung. The persona, the ego, the shadow, the anima and animus, and the self. Each one a vital piece in the journey toward wholeness. So let's begin with the persona. The persona is the mask we wear. It's your social mask, the version of you that was shaped to fit in, to be liked, to be accepted. It's not inherently bad. It helps us navigate roles and responsibilities. But the problem arises when we start to believe that this mask is who we are. So here's a helpful example of a healthy persona. A therapist adopts a calm, grounding persona in sessions to hold space for others. And now here's an example of an unhealthy, over-identified persona. A corporate executive presents as a polished and successful person, but hides her inner struggles out of fear that she won't be accepted. When we over-identify with a persona, we exile any part of ourselves that doesn't fit the image. And those parts, they don't disappear. They become the shadow. So now let's move on to the ego. The ego is the center of our conscious identity. The ego is your conscious self. It says, I am. It includes your preferences, your values, your story, and your sense of individual identity. A healthy ego helps you make decisions, set boundaries, stand in your truth. But when unbalanced, it swings in two directions: an inflated ego or a fragile ego. The inflated ego seeks control, domination, or constant validation. And a fragile ego crumbles under criticism and needs external approval to feel worthy. An inflated ego seeks control, domination, or constant validation. And a fragile ego crumbles under criticism and needs external approval to feel worthy. So an example of an unhealthy inflated ego is a startup founder believes he's the sole reason for the company's success and refuses to take feedback. His arrogance drives away talent and stifles the company's growth. In the end, his inflated ego becomes his own downfall. And an example of an unhealthy fragile ego is a musician stops creating after a bad review, internalizing it as a reflection of their own self-worth. They can't distinguish between the feedback about the music and their personal identity. So now let's explore an example of a healthy ego. An artist believes in her vision despite criticism. Her ego gives her the confidence to stand by her authentic expression. She creates to connect, not to be validated. And even when faced with judgment, she continues to make what she feels called to, using her art as a vessel for creative flow. So the ego is necessary, but it's not the whole truth of who you are. Which now brings us to the shadow, the hidden self. So the shadow is everything you've rejected, suppressed, or disowned to keep your persona and ego intact. It lives in the unconscious, but it influences your life constantly through triggers, projections, sabotage, compulsions, addictions, and deep emotional patterns. So how does the shadow form? It often begins in childhood through our relationships, our environment, and the messages we receive. Maybe we were punished for expressing anger or shamed for being playful or too loud. Maybe we were praised only when we were quiet, agreeable, or good. So we learn this part of me is not safe. This part of me is not lovable. And into the shadow it goes. What goes in the shadow exactly? Anger, if you were taught it was dangerous. Sexuality, if you were told it was shameful. Confidence, if it was seen as obnoxious or too much. Vulnerability, if it was viewed as weakness. Even joy, creativity, and brilliance if they didn't feel safe. But here's the truth. The shadow isn't just darkness. It also holds your brilliance, your power, and buried gold. When you integrate it, you don't just heal, you reclaim your wholeness. So now I'm going to cover 3 basic examples of the shadow around sex, money, and power so you can get an understanding and some context as to how all of this plays out. Example 1, Grace and sexuality. Grace grows up in a strict religious household where sex was never talked about except to say that it was sinful outside of marriage. She was praised for being modest, obedient, and pure. So her ego identity formed around being the good girl. She believed that saving herself for marriage would guarantee love, safety, and happiness. But once married, she felt emotionally and physically disconnected. Sex felt transactional, something that she was supposed to give and not enjoy. After the divorce, her shadow pushed her to the other extreme. She often had sex on the first date, mistaking rebellion for empowerment. But deep down, she felt like she was betraying herself. Through shadow work, Grace realized that her behavior wasn't driven by freedom, but an unconscious attempt to reclaim her worth and closeness through intimacy. She redefined her relationship with sexuality not as something to control or give away, but as a sacred, sovereign expression of her true self. As a result, she was able to meet a man who respected her boundaries, honored her depth, and connected with her beyond the physical, something her past patterns never allowed. Example 2, Joe and money. Joe grew up in a household where wealth was associated with greed and corruption. His parents often said things like, "Rich people are selfish," and praised self-sacrifice as virtuous. So Joe's ego identity formed around being humble, selfless, and morally above materialism. He became a social worker, deeply committed to helping others. But secretly, he resented living paycheck to paycheck. He craved abundance, but he felt guilty for wanting more. His shadow carried envy, shame, and a hidden belief that only evil people are wealthy. Through shadow work, Joe unpacked his limiting beliefs and recognized that his desire for abundance wasn't wrong. It was his birthright. He confronted these untrue, inherited narratives and redefined his relationship with money. He realized that abundance didn't make him bad. It gave him the freedom to live, give, and serve from overflow. He realized that money itself isn't evil. It's simply a tool. And while bad people may use it for harm, good people can use it to create even more good in the world. As a result, he allowed himself to receive more, and he used it to make an even bigger positive impact in the world. And example 3, Ava and power. Ava grew up watching her father dominate every conversation and make all the decisions, while her mother stayed quiet and went along to keep the peace. From this, Ava learned that power belongs to others, and that it was safer to stay small. Her ego identity formed around being agreeable, easygoing, and non-confrontational. As an adult, she often found herself drawn to bold, assertive partners who mirrored her father's energy. At first, their confidence gave her a spark, but over time, she realized she couldn't fully be herself in the relationship. She'd grow resentful of them for the very traits that once attracted her. Through shadow work, Ava recognized she had disowned her own power, projecting it onto others. By reclaiming her voice and inner authority, she no longer needed someone else to lead. She became more expressive, respected, and grounded in relationships where power could be shared, not surrendered. The persona, ego, and shadow are all connected. The persona is who you present to the world. The ego is who you think you are. And the shadow is everything you had to hide to keep those identities intact. The more tightly you cling to your ego story, the more you push its opposite into the shadow, where it quietly runs the show until you're ready to face it. Now, let's explore one final piece of the unconscious according to Carl Jung, the anima and animus. The anima and animus is your inner feminine and masculine. The anima is the feminine aspect of a man's psyche, and the animus is the masculine aspect of a woman's psyche. When balanced, they bring wholeness. When unbalanced, they distort our sense of identity and relationships. With a balanced anima, a man embraces his emotional depth and expresses vulnerability. And with an unbalanced anima, he becomes clingy, overly sentimental, and expects partners to soothe his unmet emotional needs. With a balanced animus, a woman develops her inner strength, logic, and assertiveness without losing her softness. And with an unbalanced animus, she over-identifies with control, becoming hyper-independent, emotionally cut off, and rejects her own need for support. The best thing we can do is heal and integrate these parts within ourselves, because the people we attract are often just mirrors of our own inner patterns. So before we roll our eyes at the guys who need princess treatment, we've got to ask, what part of me is calling that in? A lot of women who attract emotionally needy or overly passive men that have an unbalanced anima, often have an overdeveloped animus. These women have learned to be hyper-independent, always in control and emotionally self-sufficient to a fault. Deep down, they may carry the belief that they can't rely on anyone, so they subconsciously attract partners who do rely on them. Men who want to be mothered, not met as equals. So instead of blaming the other gender, the real work is to look inward. Ask yourself, where am I out of balance? What part of me doesn't trust being supported? When we shift that, we stop attracting unintegrated partners and start magnetizing ones who meet us in our wholeness. And now lastly, we are going to cover the self. At the center of it all is the part we're ultimately returning to, the self. So the self is the divine organizing principle. The self is your whole being. It includes your ego, persona, shadow, anima, animus, and also your higher self or your soul. It is the divine essence within you that seeks wholeness. The path of individuation, the process Carl Jung described, is about integrating all these parts to return to the self. The goal isn't to kill the ego or erase the shadow. It's to integrate them, to become a full, radiant, conscious expression of your authentic truth. That is the alchemical process, not escaping the darkness, but transmuting it. So your energy rises, your frequency shifts, and you stop unconsciously repeating the past. That's how you begin to manifest a life that's not built on survival patterns, but on a conscious choice, deep alignment, and truth. If you loved this episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a review. Remember, you're not here to be perfect. You're here to be whole. So until next time, keep going inward, keep integrating, and keep alchemizing.